beautiful lot, and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, your idiot savant who knows a lot about the 80s mixtaper. Hope you're all having a good week. It is absolutely sweltering here in the UK at the moment. I record this pod in my little office, which used to be the garage. We also live on the crest of a hill, which means we're exposed to all the elements constantly. And with no insulation, my little studio has two settings: Icelandic in the winter and the surface of the sun around this time of year. And we're very much hurtling towards the latter today. I'm shirtless, my moobs are flapping everywhere, but I do it with pride. Anyway, just before we kick the show off proper today, I just wanted to do a little contextual news around the music industry. It's not really something which impacts me, but could impact the music on this pod. So you may have seen that Spotify have come out and probably unsurprisingly, given all the other AI stuff that's going on at the moment, they are going to allow expansion into AI generated music, specifically a remix feature, shifting from personalization to generation, and see it as, what a surprise, quote unquote, another revenue generation tool. How do I feel about this? How do we feel about this? That's the golden question, isn't it? I don't very often get political on this pod, but I'm about to, and I completely understand if you don't agree with my point of view, but I feel the need to be transparent. Look, I think it's fair to say that now, on reflection, we all got conned by what was termed disruption, this 20-teen phenomenon of the previous decade where a tech bro is taking an already existing service, turning it into a subscription or cheap model to exploit accessibility, and making it A, cheaper to the consumer, but B, on the premise of the sacrifice of our data and the lowering of employees' wages. And if you squint hard enough, you can kind of kid yourself that it was a good thing. You know, well, Uber made taxis more competitive and possibly maybe raised service standards. But let's be real, it's still a taxi, and now they get paid less. Same with the pizza delivery guy, same with your TV channels and movie theatres. And at some point, surely we have to ask ourselves whether a life where we own nothing and rent everything to a few tech bro millionaires or billionaires is the way we want to live. And the same applies to music, and that brings us to Spotify. I have a complex relationship with Spotify and their CEO, Daniel Ek. Actually, I think he's now the chairman. Now, for the few who managed to hear the original first episode of the pod way back in 2024, when I thought I was the reincarnation of Kenny Everett before I took it down because I wasn't very funny, you will also know that actually this podcast first started in 2023, exclusively on Spotify. Why? Because at the time, Spotify were peddling a product called Music and Chat. The premise being that you could have your own podcast and plug it into Spotify's music directory. So literally the music was on the pod. Globally, lots of wonderful niche pods sprung up celebrating all types of music. It was an absolute godsend. And the only catch was that from a copyright standpoint, the pod had to be exclusive to Spotify, which, made sense. It's where the license was. And that's why I started this podcast originally. By December 2023, Spotify announced they were cancelling Music and Chat because, and here was the phrase at the time, it was only sort of working. Well, it either wasn't working or it was, but in losing that, hundreds of incredible podcasts were suddenly destitute as they lost the ability to play music, including my own, and hours of work and promotion were lost due to Spotify's, and I'm going to say it here, short-sighted position. Bear in mind that every piece of music we played was promoting a band to a new generation of fans. But whatever, I then took the decision to start again and use playlists, and that was May 2024. I also couldn't have done what I did in 2016 in listening to every single UK charting entry of the 80s without Spotify. It's thousands of singles, so again, if you squint hard enough, you can convince yourself that you have access to almost every piece of music ever. And that is a beautiful thing. It really is. Plus, the concept of buying 3,000 plus singles is both insane from a logistical or financial perspective. But as an artist, unless you're Taylor Swift or Lewis Capaldi, or, whichever A-list celebrity is currently flavour of the month, All the other good bands or B or C list singers or new musicians are completely shafted by it. And here's a great example from our current crop of musicians from this podcast. Gary Numan, the godfather of electronica, revealed that one of his songs, which was played 1 million times, netted him £37. £37. Let that sink in. £37 for spending a few weeks writing a song, hiring a studio and producer, possibly some session musicians, and then publishing it. And the net outcome is £37. Now, he was around before all this shit, and I'm sure he's more than financially secure. But 37 quid. What have we become? And here's the thing. I know everyone cuts their cloth differently, and I'm currently unemployed, but music is so important to my well-being that I would happily double the price of my Spotify subscription if I had any belief that the money was not going to go to some grifting tech bro or the record companies, who also, in my opinion, are doing a staggeringly bad job of holding these music platforms to account. And now they're introducing AI, stand up Universal Music Group, and punch yourselves in the face. It's created so a bunch of talentless dweebs in their bedrooms who have neither the motivation or the skill to learn a musical instrument can take a classic song and press a button with a fudgy greasy finger and publish the AI created slop that plops out of it. All for a new revenue stream. And then you apply that to every song, and it's just an awful mire. Divide and conquer. Apparently artists need to give their consent, but what does that even mean at this point? The playlists on my pod are a necessary evil, and maybe there's a desperate part of me which likes to think that having listened to a song, you'll go on to Bandcamp or even eBay and pick up a physical copy of the single. I am disgusted with what's going on. And I'll finish with this. I hope that with this announcement that most artists withdraw their consent, or better yet, leave the music platforms altogether. And I really, really hope this new quote-unquote revenue stream falls completely spectacularly on its arse, and both Spotify, UMG, and anyone else who supports it gets a metaphorical bloody nose from the experience. If my podcast had to end because all the bands had buggered off and left the platforms, I'd take it on the chin. I do it for the love anyway. It makes no money, so actually it's no skin off my nose. Do I think AI has a place in our society? Yes. But isn't it fascinating that rather than point it at social care, an ageing population and other problems which plague our society, they are letting it run rampantly over the things which make it great to be an actual human? Art, music, literature, anything creative. It just needs to stop. I just needed to get it off my chest, as I'm totally fed up with some sociopathic twats running everything and ruining everything. There, rant over. Anyway, today we plunge headfirst into the cool waters of Playlist 43 and the back end of June 1982, and what a lineup of songs to explore we have. We'll be starting with some a cappella Bucks Fizz, Dollar then have their last Trevor Horn moment, the Steve Miller Band cast a magic spell on us, before we reach the final Roxy music song in the Yuppie Sex trilogy. Ironically, Gary Numan then takes us to bed, the Clash make a triumphant return, and we end with the Four Tops taking us back to school. As mentioned in my rant above, due to copyright laws, we can't play the songs in the pod. But to get round this minor inconvenience, you will find playlists for both Spotify and Apple Music in the episode description, plus a full track listing. All you need to do is switch between the pod and the music when you're out jogging or something, and the all-in-one show effect can be readily achieved. Anyway, without further ado and promising no more rants, let's get back to the music. We last met Bucks Fizz in April 1982, riding high on yet another chart success with My Camera Never Lies. That complex, frenetic slice of pop perfection had just become their third UK #1 single in less than a year. Along with Making Your Mind Up and The Land of Make Believe, they were now firmly established as pop royalty in the early 1980s. Their parent album, Are You Ready, had landed well, securing their position at the very top of the mainstream British music scene. They'd proven they could master complex, multi-layered studio production under the guidance of their resident mastermind songwriter and producer, Andy Hill. But pop longevity is a game of survival in the 80s. If you stay in one place, the audience moves on. Having conquered the charts with rapid-fire hooks and high-energy dance routines, the band needed to prove they were more than just a well-oiled commercial machine. They needed a different sound. And that pivot arrived in June 1982 with their next single release. It wasn't a synth-heavy dance track, and it didn't feature a high-energy stage routine. Instead, it stripped away the heavy instrumentation to reveal four voices in close harmony. This is Now Those Days Are Gone. This is track 1, playlist 43, press play now. Now Those Days Are Gone was released as a 7-inch single by RCA. The track represents a dramatic artistic departure for the group. Written by Andy Hill and Nicola Martin, the song is an explicitly melancholic, mostly a cappella ballad. It serves as a showcase for member Mike Nolan, who took the lead vocal duties on the track. His performance earned significant critical praise, proving the group possessed genuine vocal depth behind their polished Eurovision choreography. The song's technical execution was incredibly demanding, featuring complex vocal layers from Bobby G, Cheryl Baker, Mike Nolan and Jay Aston, supported by a subtle orchestral arrangement. Following intense recording sessions, this track impressed record executives, leading to its selection as a single. The strategy was highly successful. The single peaked at number 8 in the UK, remaining on the chart for a total of 9 weeks. Across the Irish Sea, the song performed even better, reaching number 5 on the Irish singles chart. The B-side of the standard UK 7-inch single featured the track Taking Me Higher. RCA Records also manufactured a limited edition 7-inch picture disc version for collectors, which came enclosed in a clear PVC sleeve. The industry took note of the song's structural brilliance. In 1983, Now Those Days Are Gone received a prestigious Ivor Novello Award nomination for Best Song of 1982. The success of the single cemented a golden summer for the group. Shortly after its chart run, Bucks Fizz received an invitation to perform at the 1982 Royal Variety Performance before the Queen and the Queen Mother. Rather than singing their own material, they showcased their harmonic range by performing the classic standard You'll Never Walk Alone. While the track achieved top 10 chart placement in the UK and Ireland, international markets took different promotional paths. In Australia and several European nations, RCA Records opted to leave Now Those Days Are Gone unreleased as a single. Instead, they promoted alternate tracks from the Are You Ready album, such as the title track or Easy Love, as standalone singles. Decades later, a different recorded version of the ballad was included on the 2006 compilation album The Lost Masters, while an early demo containing an explicit word by Andy Hill surfaced on The Lost Masters 2, the final cut in 2008. Next time, we will follow the group as they turn up the temperature for their final single of an imperious 1982 with If You Can't Stand the Heat. For our track 2, we pay one last visit to Dollar for a while, though we will see them again in 5 years' time for one last hurrah. As we've already mentioned, Dollar, while a bit of a Marmite act, have an important part to play in the early 80s picture, as they are part of what the 80s evolves into, away from post-punk, new wave and early synth, morphing into a glossy, futurist playground of synthesised wonderment known as new pop. At the absolute vanguard of this sonic revolution is a man who at this juncture needs no introduction, who can look at a seemingly lightweight variety show pop act and see the future of electronic drama. That man is, of course, Trevor Horn. When we last left them, they were landing a number of hits on the UK charts. It was March 1982 and their third consecutive ballad with Horn, the glittering, melodrama-soaked ballad Give Me Back My Heart, had just peaked beautifully at number 4 on the UK singles chart. It followed the spectacular top 5 success of Mirror Mirror and the career-reviving Handheld in Black and White. Horn had effectively taken a duo previously written off as mildly naff also-rans and cloaked them in a wall of sound featuring high drama synthesizers and pristine multi-layered vocal tracking. But the pair wanted to push the electronic envelope further. They wanted a track that didn't just sit comfortably on the radio, but one that actively reflected the neon-lit, late-night visual culture emerging at the dawn of the MTV era. They needed something cinematic. What they released was Videotheque. This is track 2, press play now. We return to the story of a track that serves as a vital bridge in modern pop production history. Videotheque was released in June 1982 as the fourth single from the duo's upcoming release, the Dollar album, released in October 1982. Written jointly by Horn and songwriter Simon Darlow, the track actually began its life during Horn's tenure with his synth-pop vehicle, the Buggles. In fact, a raw demo of the song recorded by Horn and Darlow was preserved and eventually included on the 2010 reissue of the second Buggles studio album, Adventures in Modern Recording. When Horn handed the track over to Dollar, he elevated it into a peerless piece of early 1980s synth-pop. He utilised cutting-edge synthesizers, ambient layered vocal echoes from Bizarre and Van Day, and a pulsating arrangement featuring bass guitar by Horn himself, alongside key synthesizer contributions from Darlow. The song was a vivid audio sketch of urban isolation, modern romance, and the visual obsession of the video age. Upon its release, Videotheque entered the UK charts, spending a total of 10 weeks in the listings and peaking at number 17. It replicated this exact peak of number 17 on the Irish singles chart, and while a top 20 hit is an enviable achievement for most, for Dollar it represented a subtle cooling off from their previous top 5 heights. Crucially, Videotheque marked the end of the line for the Dollar and Trevor Horn partnership. Horn's studio wizardry had caught the attention of the wider industry at this point. He was already moving on to masterminding ABC's seminal album, The Lexicon of Love, and laying the groundwork for his legendary work as a mega producer, which would earn him the moniker the man who invented the 80s. Dollar's subsequent single, Give Me Some Kind of Magic, which was written and produced by Van Day and Bizarre themselves, stalled at number 34 in September 1982. By 1983, the duo suffered a severe reversal of fortune, resulting in a bitter personal split and the temporary dissolution of the band. For the next few years, both artists attempted solo careers with little commercial reward. However, the story of Dollar had one final triumphant chapter left to write. In 1986, realising they were stronger together, they reformed. Early reunion singles failed to crack the crucial top 40, leaving them searching for a definitive comeback vehicle. They found it in late 1987 by looking towards the contemporary synth-pop landscape. Working with producer Phil Harding for the London Records label FFRR, they recorded a glossy, high-energy cover version of a new band called Erasure and their hit Oh L'Amour. But we are a long way from that yet. We say adieu to Dollar at this point. We'll see them one last time in 1987. Next up, we introduce a band who had been the kings of the charts in the 70s, but who will have but one entry into our 80s podcast. But my goodness, it is huge and it is Marmite. The early 1980s was a strange transitional twilight zone for the giants of classic rock. In fact, the word twilight is fitting in many ways. Those gritty guitar gods who ruled stadiums in the mid-1970s suddenly looked at the charts and saw neon leg warmers, synth drum machines, and a new beast called MTV. Many of them dug their heels in. They fought the future, and some were lost. But not our next artist. He didn't fight the pop tide. He rode it like a seasoned surfer catching a giant wave. He traded his raw blues rock aesthetic for electronic squiggles, a bouncy dance floor bass line, and a vocal delivery so coolly detached it felt like ice melting under a studio spotlight. The song we're talking about became a massive, inescapable global hit. It reached number 1 in America, Australia, Canada, and across Europe. It is a track that features lyrics that are aggressively simple a rhyming scheme that shouldn't work, and a groove that is completely undeniable. Let's drop the needle on this piece of pop rock sorcery. This is Abracadabra by the Steve Miller Band, track 3. Let's slip under the synthesizer magic and into the circuits of time to travel back several decades. We have to go back to the origins of the man behind the curtain, Stephen Howarth Miller. Steve Miller was born on October the 5th, 1943 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Music wasn't a hobby in the Miller household, it was a permanent guest. His mother was a jazz-influenced singer, and his father, Dr. George Miller, was a pathologist who also happened to be a passionate amateur recording engineer. Because of his father's passion, the family home was a regular pit stop for titans of American music. When Steve was just a toddler, his godfather, none other than the electric guitar pioneer Les Paul, taught him his very first guitar chords. A few years later, blues legend T-Bone Walker spent time at their house showing a young Miller how to play the guitar behind his back. By the time the family relocated to Texas in 1950, Miller was already single-mindedly focused on music. While attending St. Mark's School of Texas in Dallas, Miller formed his first band called the Marksmen. He taught his older brother Buddy how to play electric bass and instructed his classmate, a kid named Boz Scaggs, on guitar chords so he could join the group. The Marksmen were a hit on the local frat circuit, booking shows before they were even old enough to drive. After a stint at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he formed a college band called the Ardells with Scaggs and keyboardist Ben Sidran, Miller dropped out just short of a degree to follow his musical muse. He went to Chicago in 1964, immersing himself in the electric blues scene. By 1966, he packed up and went out west to San Francisco. In California, he formed the Steve Miller Blues Band, quickly dropping the blues from the moniker to become the Steve Miller Band. They signed with Capitol Records and released a string of critically respected psychedelic rock albums like Children of the Future and Sailor. But the real commercial breakthrough happened in 1973 when Miller repositioned himself as a master of the concise hook-filled radio single. Enter the Joker. We've all heard the Joker, right? We all must have done. Or maybe you're old enough to remember the 1991 Levi's advert of a woman working in an open-plan office and a guy in leathers riding his Harley up to her desk before dropping off a fresh pair of jeans, as some people call me the space cowboy, some people call me the gangster of love, some people call me Maurice, plays in the background. The Joker swept across America, hitting number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1974. He followed that monumental success with the multi-platinum albums Fly Like an Eagle in 1976 and Book of Dreams in 1977, scoring another number 1 anthem with Rockin' Me. By 1978, Miller had achieved stadium-packing superstardom. But then the musical landscape began to fracture. New wave, punk, and sleek synth pop arrived to challenge the old guard. That brings us directly to the creation of Abracadabra. The musical foundation of the track had actually been sitting on a shelf for several years. Miller had constructed a compelling mid-tempo instrumental track, but he was completely stuck on the words. By his own admission, his initial lyrics were completely atrocious. The creative breakthrough finally happened on a ski slope in Sun Valley, Idaho. While out in the mountains, Miller spotted pop and Motown icon Diana Ross. Ross had just taken a tumble and was sitting on her backside in the snow, surrounded by a wall of about 9 bodyguards. Miller skied on past to head down the mountain for lunch. As he sat down, his mind drifted back to the 1960s. Early in his career, he had performed on the exact same episode of the NBC musical variety television show Hullabaloo with Diana Ross and the Supremes. Sitting at the ski resort, Miller began to visually map out what the Supremes would have done with the melody. With that distinct pop lens in place, the lyrical block evaporated. Steve Miller wrote the final lyrics to Abracadabra in exactly 15 minutes. He leaned into a hypnotic, repetitive magic theme, lifting the famous line, Round and round it goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. Straight from the spinning wheel segment of the classic television and radio programme, the original Amateur Hour. He paired it with rhythmic couplets like, I want to reach out and grab ya. When Miller brought the finished track to Capitol Records, the executives didn't care for it. They initially didn't want to release it as a single. However, because of his unique international distribution deal with Phonogram, the single was released overseas, first through Mercury Records. It immediately exploded, rocketing to number 1 in 7 countries outside the US and reaching number 2 in the UK. Realising they had a massive hit on their hands, Capitol Records relented and made Abracadabra the lead single for the album in the US, released ahead of the full album's debut on June the 15th, 1982. The song proved the initial hesitation entirely wrong. It climbed all the way to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, holding the top position for 2 non-consecutive weeks in September 1982. It engaged in a dramatic chart battle with Chicago's Hard to Say I'm Sorry, which is coming up in a few pods by the way, which briefly knocked Miller out of the top spot before Abracadabra reclaimed it 2 weeks later like magic. While the track drew the ire of some purist rock fans who felt Miller had shifted too far into the pop machine, it cemented his legacy as a chameleonic pop singer who knew exactly how to capture a radio hook. Decades later, its hypnotic groove continued to travel through the cultural ether, most notably when it was heavily interpolated by Eminem for his 2024 global hit single Houdini. The review sites have not been kind in the intervening years, with some calling the rhyming scheme cheap, and one even calling it a war crime, which is perhaps a little harsh. But the fact remains, Abracadabra is a wonderful 80s artefact. We all remember it. We remember it from our birthday parties. It shows a band briefly leaning into the future, finding lyrical inspiration in the snow, and trusting their musical instincts over the doubts of a record label boardroom. For our track 4 on playlist 43. I'm kind of sad. If you've followed the show, you will know that I've had a crazy theory about Roxy Music increasing the yuppie population of West London with the Roxy Music sex trilogy. The premise is that all young bankers, accountants and barristers in their far too hot apartments would stick on these songs while slow dancing with their fiancées, and 9 months later a new Hugo, Spencer, Rosia or Harriet was born. Well, we've done Jealous Guy, which was the first, More Than This, the second, and today we reach the third and final song of the trilogy, and almost the final part Roxy has to play in this whole caper, but not quite yet. And when we do, we'll really go over their legacy with a fine-tooth comb. Today, we talk about Avalon the song and Avalon the album. We last met Roxy Music in May 1982 with More Than This, the opening salvo of their 8th studio album Avalon. It was a track that re-established the British group as masters of a new hyper-refined sonic universe, a grown-up suave Roxy. If More Than This introduced the architectural blueprint of this sophisticated adult-oriented landscape, the album's title track would become its absolute emotional and structural peak. This is a song built entirely on texture, late-night intuition, and a series of happy studio accidents. Turn down the lights, grab your partner close, and sway as we listen to Avalon. This is track 4. When Brian Ferry, guitarist Phil Manzanera, and saxophonist Andy McKay set out to make Avalon, they did not arrive with a completed book of sheet music. The process, helmed by producer Rhett Davies, began in mid-1981 at Manzanera's Gallery Studios in Chertsey, Surrey. It then migrated to the isolation of Compass Point Studios in Nassau, Bahamas, before final sessions moved to the Power Station in New York. Speaking to Sound on Sound in 2003, Davies recalled the writing method plainly. We started with a blank sheet. There weren't any songs. Phil might have had some chord sequences or musical ideas, and Andy would have some tunes that he'd written which he'd present to Brian, and Brian would play around with them to see if there was any work he could do. I would then spend time with Brian alone, writing. It didn't take that long. We'd go in the morning and I'd get a groove going to get something happening that Brian could walk into, and hopefully he'd be inspired by it. The actual song Avalon almost didn't happen. Originally, the track existed as a fast pop sounding placeholder called New Scatter. The title referred to Ferry's method of laying down 4 or 5 improvised scat vocals to carve out the phonetic shape of the vocal track. Rhett Davies explained to Classic Pop magazine that they spent months struggling with it. It was only during the mixing sessions at the power station in New York that Ferry finally refashioned the track, slowing it down significantly to accommodate lyrics based on the Arthurian legend of Avalon. To capture the physical depth of this new arrangement, the production team took radical acoustic measures. Drummer Andy Newmark's percussion and Jimmy Malin's percussion overdubs were fed directly into the power station's famous 75-foot concrete stairwell. Mixing engineer Bob Clearmountain revealed in Sound on Sound that this massive stairwell acted as a natural acoustic reverb chamber. The long echo time lasted around 4 seconds, varying based on the humidity of the weather in New York that day. Yet, the defining turning point for Avalon occurred on a Sunday evening when Ferry was struggling to finalise his lead vocal track. Rhett Davies and Ferry stepped out of their studio room for a moment and heard a Haitian singer named Yannick Etienne recording a commercial demo in the adjacent room. Blown away by her vocal power, Ferry immediately invited her into the session to sing backing vocals. Davies recalled that during the first playback, Etienne remained silent until the track ended, misunderstanding the cue. Davies explicitly told her, "No, we want her to sing anything that she would want to sing, totally free." On the very next take, Etienne delivered the dreamlike improvised high-register melodies that defined the final third of the record. Her performance completely transformed the track. Ferry was so deeply inspired by her vocals that he immediately went back into the live room and re-sang his own lead vocal part. Avalon became a commercial monster and a monument of what critics would label sophistopop. Released on the 28th of May 1982, the album spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the UK Albums Chart and remained on the charts for over a year. The single Avalon was released as the album's second single, peaking at number 13 on the UK Singles Chart. To support the track, a music video was filmed at the historic Mentmore Towers country house in Buckinghamshire. It was directed by Howard Gard, with Ridley Scott credited as co-director, and featured actress Sophie Ward. While the album initially only peaked at number 53 on the US Billboard 200, it became an enduring sleeper hit in North America. It achieved gold status in December 1986 and finally crossed the platinum threshold for over 1 million shipments in December 1992, establishing itself as the best-selling album of Roxy Music's career. The album cemented a shift from the band's early 1970s avant-garde glam rock into an era of immaculate atmospheric seduction. But the end was in sight. Next time, we will look at how this delicate sonic formula pushed the band to its final destination. As we explore the album's hidden, melancholic masterpiece, Take a Chance With Me, and Roxy's place in the pantheon of rock music. But for now, this relationship has been well and truly consummated. For track 5, we are up in an aeroplane. Gary Numan is running away. Not metaphorically, he is literally in an aeroplane flying around the world to escape the British music press, tax problems, and the crushing expectation of being the definitive godfather of synth pop. Just a year prior, in April 1981, he played 3 sold-out farewell concerts at Wembley Arena, telling the world he was retiring from touring. He was 23 years old, but retirement did not take. Instead, Numan traded his stark minimalist Moog synthesizers for something looser, darker and surprisingly heavy on the groove. We last left him in the company of Chameleons, specifically his 1982 single Music for Chameleons, where he introduced us to a brand new sonic palette. Gone were the robotic cold alien personas of the Pleasure Principle. Enter a strange paranoid world of dark funk driven by a slinky fretless bass. Numan was trying to navigate what happens when the future you predicted arrives. and it does not look like you anymore. He is hurt, he is cynical, and he is about to release a song that turns a bitter real-life breakup into a top 10 dance floor thriller. Let's listen to We Take Mystery to Bed. Press play now. We Take Mystery to Bed was released on June the 11th, 1982, as the second single from Gary Numan's fourth solo studio album, I Assassin. The single was originally scheduled to drop in May, but Beggar's Banquet had to push it back by a month due to production difficulties. When it finally hit the shelves, it climbed all the way to number 9 on the UK singles chart. It remains Numan's last ever top 10 hit single. The story of this song is intensely personal, bitter, and direct. The song is written entirely about Numan's ex-girlfriend at the time. Numan did not even try to hide her identity. In the very first line of the song, he sings confiscate letters like DEB. According to Numan's biography, he first met her at a club where she was hanging out with her sister, noting it was simply inevitable that he would fancy one of them. But things went sour. The track is laced with what reviewers called an earthy cynicism. He sings, "You're my assassin, but you can't see the crime," directly tying her to the overarching theme of the I Assassin album. He adds, "I looked at you mistaking needles for eyes, painting a picture of cold betrayal." Musically, the track is loaded with collaboration, featuring musicians who would define the decade's sound. The drums are anchored by Chris Slade, a powerhouse session drummer who would later find fame pounding the skins for AC/DC. But the absolute star of the show here is the bass guitar, played by a young pre-fame Pino Palladino. This album was one of the very first times a fretless bass was utilised not just as a rhythm instrument, but as the lead melody instrument in a pop song. Palladino's rubbery sliding bass line weaves completely around Numan's deadpan vocal, creating an uneasy, slinky tension. Aside from Slade's drums and Palladino's bass, Numan played every single instrument on the track himself at Rock City Studios in Shepperton. Numan was fighting for his musical life here, trying to prove he wasn't just a one-trick pony with a synthesizer. While the UK press slammed him for being cold and robotic, he delivered a groove-heavy piece of synth-pop funk that proved he could make people dance while singing about heartbreak. Next up, we welcome the return of a band we last met in 1981, where they were either appealing to their hardcore politicised fans or getting bogged down in being over-politicised, depending on your point of view. All that was about to change. It is, of course, those titans of punk and post-punk, The Clash, riding the grooves of the Magnificent Seven, a track from their sprawling triple album Sandinista. By that point, London's premier punk firebrands were fully immersed in the sounds of New York City, hip-hop, funk, reggae and disco. But as 1981 bled into 1982, the internal friction within the band was reaching a boiling point. The creative chaos that once fueled them was beginning to fracture the group's foundation. And yet, out of this escalating studio tension came a track that would catapult them onto American Top 40 radio and into heavy rotation on the burgeoning television network called MTV. It is a song that pairs a relentlessly danceable piano boogie with a satirical narrative about censorship, military defiance, and the unstoppable power of a good groove. Whether the purists liked it or not, The Clash were back. This is a song about freedom, wrapped in an infectious chart-topping package. This is Rock the Casbah, track 6. When The Clash gathered at Ear Studios in London to begin work on what would become their fifth studio album, Combat Rock, the atmosphere was strained. However, the genesis of Rock the Casbah didn't come from a shared band jam session. It came from a moment of solitary focus by the band's drummer, Topper Headon. Finding himself alone in the studio one day, Headon sat down and recorded the musical backbone of the track completely by himself. He began by bunging out a precise funk-infused drum track. He then ran over to the piano to overlay a rhythmic boogie-woogie line reportedly influenced by Booker T and the MG's Green Onions. and completed the backing loop by recording the bass line. When the rest of the band returned and heard the instrumental, they were astonished by how complete it was, requiring only minor guitar overdubs by Mick Jones and lead vocals from Joe Strummer. While Heden's instrumentation was perfect, his original lyrics were not. According to Clash guitar technician Digby Cleaver, Heden had written a sentimental set of words about how much he missed his girlfriend. Frontman Joe Strummer took one look at the explicit, highly personal lyrics, screwed the piece of paper into a ball and threw it over his head. Strummer wanted something with a sharper edge, a broader worldview, and a bit of biting sarcasm. The spark from the new lyrics came from two distinct sources. First, the band's manager Bernie Rhodes had been complaining about the length and complexity of the tracks they were recording for Combat Rock. Following a particularly long take of a song called Sean Flynn, Rhodes asked the band facetiously, "Does everything have to be as long as a ragga?" Strummer returned to his room at the Iroquois Hotel in New York City and typed out the opening line on his typewriter. "The king told the boogeymen, you have to let the ragga drop." Second, Strummer began reflecting on a news report he had encountered regarding the political climate in Iran following the 1979 Islamic Revolution, where citizens face severe punishments, including flogging, for owning Western music or disco records. Strummer used this real-world censorship to craft a fabulous narrative about an Arab king or a sheriff who bans Western rock music. In the song's climax, the king orders jet pilots to bomb the citizens defying the ban, but the pilots ignore his orders, tune their cockpit radios to the rock station, and join the party instead. To flavour this surreal, anti-authoritarian tale, Strummer populated the text with a series of loanwords like Sharif, Bedouin, Sheikh, Kosher, Muezzin, Minaret and Casbah. When Mick Jones added the final production details, he included a quirky accidental touch, a monophonic electronic beep at the 1:52 mark. This noise was actually the Dixie alarm chime from Jones's digital wristwatch, which happened to bleed into the vocal track and was intentionally left in the final mix. Released as a single on June the 11th, 1982, Rock the Casbah became the biggest American hit of the Clash's career, climbing all the way to number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 30 in the UK. Tragically, the song's massive success was deeply bittersweet. Due to a worsening heroin addiction, Topper Heden was dismissed from the band just before the single was released and ahead of the Combat Rock tour. When it came time to film the song's iconic, heavily rotated MTV music video, it was original Clash drummer Terry Chimes who sat behind the kit, miming the masterful groove that Heden had entirely envisaged and constructed. The song's legacy took a deeply ironic turn years later. During the 1991 Gulf War, the track was adopted by the US military, becoming the first song broadcast on the US Armed Forces radio network during Operation Desert Storm. American pilots even wrote the phrase "Rock the Casbah" onto bombs destined for Iraq. According to friends interviewed in the 2007 documentary Joe Strummer, The Future is Unwritten, Strummer wept when he learned this, devastated that his satirical anthem celebrating civilian freedom against military control had been co-opted as a literal marching tune for war. We end today and the first half of Playlist 43 by revisiting a band who by decade's end will have us going loco in Acapulco. But first, they need to educate us. We last met the Four Tops in 1981, riding high on the success of their Casablanca Records comeback hit When She Was My Girl, episode 30.5, which surged to number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart and reached number 11 on the pop chart. It felt like a glorious mature renaissance for Levi Stubbs, Abdul Duke Fakir, Ronaldo Obi Benson and Lawrence Payton. And now a quick detour. We all love the film Grease, don't we? I mean, it's a classic. Travolta, Newton-John, the 50s. It's camp, it's funny, Grease lightning. Well, Hollywood was desperate to replicate the lightning in a bottle success of the 1978 original involving Danny Zuko and Sandy Olsen. I did not know her name was Olsen until I've just learnt that, but there we go. Enter Grease 2 and the Four Tops. Instead of the vintage Motown soul they pioneered, The legendary vocal group was enlisted to deliver a high-energy, horn-heavy, slightly frantic pop-rock track written specifically to open this high school movie sequel. They called it Back to School Again. This is track 7, our final song today. Back to School Again by the Four Tops was released on June the 11th, 1982 as the opening track of the Grease 2 original motion picture soundtrack. The story of this song is structurally tethered to Hollywood commercial ambitions. The track was written by the songwriting duo of Louis St. Louis and Howard Greenfield. Greenfield was an industry titan, famous for co-writing canonical mid-century pop hits like Breaking Up Is Hard to Do and Love Will Keep Us Together. For Grease 2, he teamed up with the film's musical director, St. Louis, to engineer a song that could match the tone of the original movie's title track. Instead of casting a contemporary 1980s pop act, the producers chose the Four Tops. This was a deliberate attempt to retain the nostalgic late 50s and early 60s rock and roll pedigree that defined the franchise. The lyrics completely lean into the hyper-literal teenage experience, with Levi Stubbs singing about how the Board of Education took away my parole. He explicitly name-checks high school frustrations, singing that geometry and history is just a pain and biology and chemistry destroys my brain. In the context of the movie, the track serves as the literal narrative driver for the opening sequence. As the song plays, the students of Rydell High arrive for their first day of class after the summer break. The performance features the unmistakable booming lead vocals of Levi Stubbs, backed by the tight, polished harmonies of the rest of the group. Structurally, the track relies on a driving rock and roll backbeat, prominent bass arrangements, and a call and response vocal structure. However, the commercial trajectory of the song closely mirrored the disastrous fate of the film itself. Paramount Pictures poured an $11.2 million budget into the production, nearly double the cost of the original. Yet, opening the exact same weekend as Steven Spielberg's E.T., Grease 2 wilted at the box office, crawling to a meagre $15.2 million worldwide gross. For context, the 1978 original was a cultural monster that pulled in nearly $400 million. The critical reception was arguably even worse than the financial fallout. The film was thoroughly savaged. Even today, it's scoring at around 32% on Rotten Tomatoes. Janet Maslin of the New York Times condemned the film as dizzy and slight, with an even more negligible plot than its predecessor had. This time the story can't even masquerade as an excuse for stringing the songs together. Songs? What songs? The numbers in Grease 2 are so hopelessly insubstantial that the cast is forced to burst into melody about pastimes like bowling. Most reviewers felt that the movie played like a hollow, hyperactive, cartoonish imitation of its predecessor. Released as a 7-inch vinyl single by RSO Records, Back to School Again was dragged down by this critical anchor, peaking at number 71 on the Billboard Hot 100 and only number 62 in the UK. The legacy of the track remains divided. For casual listeners, it represents a highly specific era of movie soundtrack tie-ins before Grease 2 transitioned into a campy midnight movie cult classic. For soul purists, hearing one of Motown's finest vocal groups sing lines like "Come on you lazy bum and get your butt out of bed" was a far cry from the emotional depth of "Reach Out, I'll Be There." Yet Stubbs' vocal delivery remained undeniably powerful, proving that even when handed a commercial Hollywood assignment, the group could not help but bring authentic vocal excellence to the studio. Shortly after this soundtrack detour, the group would make an official return to their roots, re-signing with Motown Records in 1983. So my good friends, that is the halfway point of playlist 43, and what a playlist it's been so far. And I've got to say, as we bid Dollar farewell for a few years, that I know they get a lot of stick for being saccharine and a bit naff. But those Trevor Horn singles from Handheld in Black and White onwards stand up even now. Handheld Black and White I think is a phenomenal song. And if you were there in the 80s, they are absolutely part of the story in a way that some of the smaller new romantic or synth acts aren't particularly. I had the pleasure of seeing Teresa Bazar perform a lot of the hits at a festival a couple of years ago, and you know what? It was great. So for all the naysayers, think again. Anyway, what do we have in store for you next week? Well, David Essex re-enters the picture and tries to get down with the kids. The Damned's very own Captain Sensible has one of the more surprising hits of the decade. Asia releases a rock classic. We briefly meet the Crown Prince of Reggae, Dennis Brown. Dexy's Midnight Runners release the biggest song of 1982. And a German act called Trio have us all saying da da da. If you're enjoying the show and would like more, please do contribute to the show's production costs by visiting my Buy Me a Coffee page, the link for which is in the episode description. I'll even roast your name by placing you in an 80s band. Plus there's other subscription options on there as well. I'm coming up on my annual renewal for my pod platform, and honestly, any contribution to that would be more than welcome right now. Also, if you can tickle the subscribe button and leave a review, it all helps. But until next time, have a lovely week and do come back for more songsmithery on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.